Well,
proceed.
I can introduce Christopher. I'm so proud. He's a biologist, a scientist, an environmentalist, lives very sustainably, and is a newly re-elected city commissioner.
Yeah.
And we're happy about that. Christopher
Thank you. That was
McVoy.
a very kind introduction. Let's see if we can make
I'm sure there's more, but I don't know what they are.
Well, I walk on water on Tuesdays and a couple other things, but
Good one. Good one.
That's pretty much accurate. I'm a soil scientist and water scientist by training. Slides over to ecology, and have mostly worked on Everglades restoration, as probably many of you know, for most of the time that I've been here. And then at some point got involved in Lake Worth politics, and I guess once you're in, you're in for the haul, I suppose. And Lisa asked me to talk a little bit about environmental issues in Lake Worth, and kind of the way that I tend to think about environmental issues sort of at a city level is I follow what's happening in several other places around the world somewhat. Seattle sticks out a lot, Portland sticks out a lot in terms of good policies, forward-thinking things. I happen to follow, I guess because my mother is Dutch, so I have sort of a Dutch language interest, but I stumbled onto the city of Ghent, which we call Ghent, but it's Ghent, in Belgium, and they have an amazing level of commitment. They're committed to being carbon neutral as a whole city, not just the city government, but the whole city by, and I forget what the year is, whether it's 2050 or 2060. I mean, it's a very, and they're doing stuff toward that end, and they're actually moving. So one of the things that to me seems important is having goals, that we as a city set goals, put them on paper so you can find them as commissions change and as people move in and out. The goals have to be measurable, things that you can actually quantify and see how you're doing, both to have some accountability for ourselves, because it's easy to backslide a little bit, and also to celebrate progress. Hey, we set a goal, we all know the thermometers and we're trying to reach this point. I think we ought to do that. Why should we do it? Well, why, I don't think for this audience is much of a question. We're all pretty committed to doing environmental things. It's just the right thing to do, and that's why you do it. But I think there are additional reasons that you can put in Lake Worth that help expand the appeal. We think it's the right thing to do, but not everybody does, or not everybody thinks it's a priority. I've, for as long as I've been in office, in my discussions with the city manager, because as a 4-1 commission, I didn't have a lot of influence in terms of votes, but in discussions with the city manager, I always emphasized that, as we all, I think, in this room know, Lake Worth is an unusual place. If it wants to compete as a city with other cities, it's best off capitalizing on its unusualness rather than trying to mimic the next city over. And I think a lot of people, that thought appeals somewhat. But there are things you can do to enhance your differenceness and your appeal. And one of those is to show that you're really seriously committed to environmental issues, and boom, you're right back to those measurable, quantifiable things that you spell out, and then you actually track how you're doing. So in terms of overall thoughts on it, that's kind of my thought. And some of you who follow solar power will remember that, I don't remember exactly how far ago, but within the last decade, probably about a half a decade, Gainesville said, you know what, we will make a commitment, because Gainesville has its own electric utility like we do, and they made a commitment to buy a certain amount of renewable energy. I believe it was 4 megawatts, but I don't remember the number for sure, in their initial offering. And they said, we'll guarantee you a certain price for 20 years. And it was sold out within days. I mean, it was just gone. Everybody said, sure, this is a very sensible investment, this is a good thing to do. And it got international attention for Gainesville. I mean, they just totally put them on the map in terms of renewable energy. It wasn't, 4 megawatts isn't in the big picture that big a commitment, but it was a very concrete one. And they've since followed with additional programs. They've tweaked it a little bit along the way. But they are very on the ball with really concrete efforts on especially renewable energy, but some other things as well. So I think we can learn. We don't have to invent everything. We're a small city with 30,000 people. We're very limited in our staff. We just don't have the staff to have, and we're limited in terms of finances. So, you know, it would be great to have every one of our different division directors not only be expert at public works or fixing roads or building community, building department, but have them also be very knowledgeable and interested in environmental issues. That would be awesome, and that's what we should have. But up till now, there's partly, you know, at least in recent years, there hasn't been a commitment to attract that, but there also hasn't been the resources to really do it. If we get it, it's because somebody's just very personally committed to it, but we need to have more. Now, in terms of just some of the concrete things that came to mind, and this is by no means, there's not a lot of logic to the list. I grouped it somewhat by land, water, and transportation. I might have another category if I can see it. I guess those are sort of the main ones. You could sort these any number of different ways, and I don't know that it makes much difference. Under land appeal, something that has struck me for a while is you want your city to look sort of nice. None of us are concerned with it looking like Boca, but as you drive around, you say, that one looks kind of that one looks kind of nice. What's the first thing that tips off to, oh, that one looks kind of nice?
Street.
Well, no, within the property itself.
Curb appeal.
Yeah, but what makes curb appeal? That's the thing. And the easiest way to do curb appeal
Landscape?
is throw a bunch of sod down, water the heck out of it, and now you got a nice big green patch. And everybody likes green. Green looks good. It works. And you look at the one next door, and nobody's watering, and there's a lot of bare sand. Who's walked in Florida scrub?
I love it.
Right.
I love it.
But what do you see mostly in Florida scrub?
Browns, grays, and some green.
And bare sand. A lot of bare sand in Florida scrub. Most of this area was either scrub up on the ridge, probably down somewhat toward the coast, or pine flatwoods. It was not a very lush, tropical looking place. That's what the community, what the rainfall in the soil can support here. So if you want it to look green, the usual curb appeal, you're going to have to pump a lot of water into that, and probably some fertilizer, and probably some pesticides. So yes, that creates curb appeal. I think if you drive around town or bike, better bike or walk, you'll see that if you've come from another part of the world and you have done somewhat well financially, one of the first things you do when you feel like you made it a little bit better, you bought the house and you're doing a little better, you put that sod in, because it looks like, you know, now I'm here. So one of my things that I'd like to do is I'd love to have a program that showed people and helped people a little bit with alternate ways to get curb appeal that isn't sod based. You know? And it's very possible to do. There are plenty of examples around of people doing it in Lake Worth, but you got to put the idea that you got to help people a little bit.
Would that be zero-scaping?
It can be a range of things. I mean, it can be, I biked by somewhere on the way to Publix this morning that it was just probably some sort of rock, and it actually looked pretty reasonable. You know, it depends on, do you do the whole thing? Do you do some local plantings? I mean, there are a number of things that you can do. It's a wide range. Xeriscaping, of course, is great because you're using very little water, but it might be a mix of, and that was what I was going to, you know, native species. You can be narrower or wider. You know, if you want to be totally native, you'd say, well, I'm only going to plant scrub species. Well, good luck with that. It's hard to find nurseries that'll supply you with scrub species, and it would be tough to make it look real appealing. But you can, you know, there are things you can do with that. I think we ought to encourage edible plants, whether it's fruit trees or gardens, and mix that in. I was talking with Brian Kirsch from the Gray Mockingbird yesterday, and he had a very good comment. You don't garden at your house? Why not? Well, I don't have the time and the money. Do you pay a lawn person? Well, why not pay that lawn person to do part of it as garden and less of it as sod? Good point. You know, things that go along with that is composting. We used to be a bit more encouraging of composting. We've kind of slacked off on that. I had a long...
I wasn't here. How were we encouraging the compost?
We did classes on it, and we either gave away or sold cheap the barrels. Okay. I personally don't see a need for barrels, but some people like them. I was told by a long-term resident, and I sort of vaguely remember it, that we used to have a mulch pile up at the Northwest ball fields. Mm-hmm. When anybody was chipping trees, they'd bring it up there, and anybody who wanted mulch could go up there and help themselves. Builds community, because not all of us have pickup trucks. Not all of us are good with the shovel. So you get one person who's good with the shovel, one with the pickup truck, and you go get a load for your neighbor. San Francisco has had for a while a program of composting restaurant scraps. Now I don't know what you want to do with if it's got meat in it, but avoid that. But you could split out and do all the vegetable scraps. There's probably quite a bit of volume of stuff that goes by, and that could be put to use. Under land doesn't really relate to all these other things at the yard scale, but mangroves. A lot of us were extremely upset that a few people, probably mostly folks living on the golf course, got the mayor's ear and said, those mangroves have to go. Well, most of us know that cutting mangroves is a big deal. You don't cut mangroves and get away with it very easily. Somehow or other, somebody pulled some sort of strings, got a permit, and they cut mangroves along the golf course, a couple of windows where they cut them right to the ground. Yeah, make some noise about that. We'll get to the action steps later. I've made noise at commission meetings a number of times.
They did that in Ocean Reef, and the guy got nailed.
Normally, if a private person does it, you get nailed to very big fines. I have no idea how we got away with it.
One
I mean,
family
I've
got
sort of
taken
an
to
idea.
court. What's in the paper?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's normal.
For violation.
It gives you a sense of the center of mass of our commission is not. They aren't here at this conversation. Mm-hmm. They need to be, and they need to hear from you on a regular basis is helpful. Water. We've got two things. One is sort of a indirect water, oceans. Pretty cool that California passed a plastic bag ban. Whole state. Don't mess around with local communities. Just ban the darn things. And if you follow it all, ocean stuff, there are a lot of people that study all the plastics that are sitting out in the big gyres of junk plastic going around in circles. And then it degrades down into smaller and smaller particles and makes problems. I had a cashier, younger person, in a Publix, not here in Lake Worth, but another place, and I said, I don't want a bag, and she piped up and said, no, that's good, they just wind up in the ocean, and then they go in the fish, and then people wonder why they get sick, and I'm going, yeah, all right for her. Yeah. So there are people out there, you know, you don't have to be totally friends or environmentalists. There are people who are aware of some of these things. So we took a lot of flack. Previous commissions, more progressive commissions, took a lot of flack for pushing on Publix when Publix came in to try and insist on a plastic bag ban. Oh, that's so ridiculous. Why are we impeding development? Why are we impeding progress? That was the only time that we had an option to get them to commit to no plastic bags. We didn't do it, and you can see plenty of plastic bags.
Who were the people who rebelled against that idea?
People who think it's embarrassing that we would do anything that doesn't favor development, of which there's a good deal of people here, or at least there are people in office that are that way. Transportation, I mean, you know, a lot of these things are sort of obvious ones. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, but I hear from a lot of people campaigning over the years that they moved here because it's distance-wise, it's bike-friendly. And that's not because of any great policy that we had. Most of you who know the history know that these lots were laid out very small initially because they were freebies for the agricultural land west. Well, those small lot lines, that's actually a very good urban planning idea. It means that you've got higher densities so that people can, it is realistic to walk or to bike in town. There's more that we could do to make it bike-friendlier, number of things. And then some of it is concrete stuff. Concrete's maybe a bad choice, but some of it is symbolic, and symbolism, I think, also is important. It sends a statement. There are cities that have bike pump stations. You can stop, and there's a pump that's bolted to the ground or whatever, and you know, if you're low on air, you pump it up.
Gainesville.
Gainesville's one, you know, there are a number of other ones. It sounds like, yeah, why don't you get your own darn pump and carry it with you, or leave it at home? Well, you could, and most people do, and that's fine, but remember that we have a diverse community here. Not everybody's got bikes with pumps on them. Having some bike pumps around sends a statement.
It is symbolic.
It's symbolic, and it's
It tells you
visible.
something. Mhm.
Yeah, there are, you know, maintenance issues. Yeah, there are vandalism, all that stuff. But a bike pump that's bolted down is not that expensive, and maybe the symbolism is worth it. So that's one. There are also tool stations where they've got the tools hanging off of things so they don't wander too much, and you can tighten up loose bolts on your bike. Things to consider. I think I skipped one actually. I'll go back slightly on water. One of the things that interests me, and this I'd like feedback on when we get to the end. Maybe I'll bring it back up. I think it would be useful to have certain policies on file with the city, whether we do it as a resolution or an ordinance or things. These are things that we think are important, so in our future planning of other things, we will take these into account. And the one that's been sitting in my head for a while is water related. We're right on the intercoastal. We know that both state and national level regulations on non-point source pollution will continue to get tighter. So sooner or later, we will be responsible for what goes in from our area into the lagoon. And we know that, you know, there's not maybe terrible stuff, but it's not great, and fertilizers and pesticides don't help the lagoon any. And sooner or later, we'll be responsible for that. So that's one. We also know that we are coastal. We have our own wells. The wells aren't way out in Wellington. They're right here. And that means we're subject to saltwater intrusion. And I think probably some of you who were here last week saw Martha's maps. And as you're going down the coast, the saltwater line where it's moved in under the ground in the aquifer comes along down the coast, parallel to the coast, and you get to Lake Worth and go, rip, we've sucked it inward. And I remember listening to a consultant telling us that, well, you know, that's really the Lake Worth Drainage District, and it's regional drainage and stuff. Well, then why isn't it north and south of it? No, I never bought it at that time. I still don't buy it. It's our wells. We pull enough fresh water that we're pulling that salt water in. So anything that we can do to reverse that, and the only thing that you can do to reverse saltwater intrusion that's coming in from the ocean is push more fresh water down. That pushes that saltwater lens back out. So anything that we do that increases infiltration into the ground and into the aquifer, instead of running its surface or stormwater drains into the lagoon, is a double positive. You're helping your saltwater intrusion problem, you're protecting the lagoon. And one that occurred to me as I was making this list this morning is, if you dig around obscure hydrology people, you'll find some old articles about submarine springs. Who's heard of submarine springs? Good. Submarine springs is where you have a spring that doesn't just bubble up out of the ground at the base of a hill somewhere or other. It actually bubbles up out under the water, under the ocean water. And they're kind of cool because if they're close to the shore, you don't usually see a major, you know, pipe. It's a seep kind of thing. But because of the difference in density of the saltwater and freshwater, if you know what you're looking for, you can spot that. And there were definitely ones down on Biscayne Bay, south of Miami, but there also were some up this area. I don't know about Lake Worth specifically, but along this part of the coast. And if you remember, you can get water into the ocean. You know, you want the water that falls on our city to eventually make its way to the ocean. That's what it's supposed to do. But it can get there surface or it can get there underwater. Which way is it going to be cleaner by the time it gets to the ocean?
Underground.
Yeah.
Underground, yeah.
Yeah.
Gets filtered. If they're close to shore, does it feel colder, that spot where the water's coming
If it
out?
was enough water, you know, probably would.
Yeah, I think we had it
Yeah.
on Long Island.
They're kind of interesting.
In
It's
the
a
Long
little-
Island Sound.
Yeah, if you've got some
Submarine
elevation. So I'd like to have an infiltration policy. And the interesting thing about putting that on record, if we did it, you know, you can lay out some of those reasons, sort of like what I've said. It influences all sorts of things. It influences how you design your roads. It influences your landscaping policy for landowners. Because and the South Florida Water Management does some of this stuff already, that they want you to keep as much water on site rather than letting it go off. And there are various things that you can do to do that, and we could have that be part of our policy. I happen to have an interest in gray water. Gray water is, as opposed to black water, which is toilets, which you want to go down the sewer and just deal with that way. But gray water is the stuff coming out of your kitchen sink or out of your shower that doesn't have a whole lot of anything in it. You can deal with that on site. Most of the western states, Arizona, you can go in, $75, you pay a fee, you give them a general idea how you're going to do it, and boom, you're done. Now you can hook up your house to do your own gray water, and you can do it yourself. Arizona has figured out, dudes, we don't have to be committed to putting people all of their water on the sewer. In fact, the more that we put on site, the better. And it's not that hard to do. The health risks are extremely low, and for $75 you're in and out and you've got a permit. We think that because we get 5 feet of rain a year, we're not a droughty place. But remember, we have a very long dry season. We're very droughty in the dry season. We're just as droughty. And that's why you can see prickly pear cactus growing here, because we're droughty enough at that thing. So eventually the state doesn't allow gray water now, but we should be planning ahead to have policies in place that we could do that.
We don't have anybody in Lake Worth using gray water?
Well, there's no official allowance, right?
Not officially.
Gotcha.
But you know, there's I'm sure there's various flavors of it, and there's better ways to do it, not so good ways to do it.
There's no one in this room.
There you go. There's no one in this room that we know.
You know, there's an intentional community in North Carolina, in Asheville, that when they built it to use the gray water. They have it all goes into it for the lawns.
Yep. And there are a lot of people doing it out west. There are people that do. There's there are workshops on it. It's actually not that hard to do, but the key piece is you've got to have elevation to do it. So if your house is up, if you design it at the time you're building, you don't necessarily have to implement it, but you can stub it out. And I tried to get the NSP program to commit to stubbing. I talked with Chip Guthrie, who's a plumber. You know, he knows about that stuff, but didn't get anywhere. Another big one, and that's sort of my last area, I think, is we have our own utilities. So far. There's always the grumbles of, we should sell them. No, we should make them better. We should make them work better for our community. We own them, so let's make it work better for the community. That gives us, by owning the utilities, enormous flexibility of putting in good policies. But we have to push for them. Well, they won't happen on their own. And you know, there's any number of things that one could keep in mind. We used to have an energy conservation program. Cost you $2 a month for, I think it was per 1,000 kilowatt hours, which is sort of the standard number for consumption. And the current mayor came in and some other people and said, $2 a month is way too expensive. We've got to get rid of that. That, to me, was an incredibly stupid decision. There's your symbolism, too. You're sending a message. We don't care about that stuff. We're not interested in it. The return on investment on that could have been calculated. Could we have managed the program a little better? Yeah, probably. Improve the program? Sure. You can always improve things. There's nothing wrong with that. Getting rid of it was not a good idea. So we should ask for that to be reinstated. And there are a number of things that one could do.
What was it that you got $2 a month if you did what?
It cost us about, on average, you know, depending on how much you used, it was prorated by use, about $2 a month. So it was a minor. It put money into a fund.
Oh, to collect the fund.
Yeah.
No, but also it was because like we had the city come and evaluate the building and give us recommendations on how to be more energy efficient.
Right.
And that's what that program was.
It was that fund.
That's what
Yeah,
$2
that was the funding stream.
They came here.
And anybody could call them and get recommendations about, you know,
And there were
inflation
rebate programs for doing energy efficient changes that you'd get some help with that. That, you know, nationwide, it's very well known that if you want to reduce your carbon footprint and fossil fuel consumption, the best, most efficient way to do it is work on conservation. It's the easiest way to do it. You know, changing your source of the energy is the next best thing, but it's a lot more expensive, generally, although that's changing too. There are things that, because we have our own utilities, is something that other people have pointed out in the past, but Richard reminded me of it. Oh, and by the way, this is Richard Stow, who is a like-minded friend, friend with a capital F, and very active in Lake Worth on environmental issues
On the
also.
tree board.
I
And
think
on
we've
the
seen him around.
Yeah, I bet you've seen him around here and there. Richard pointed out that we should use the ability of the city or the utilities to do bulk buying. And you could imagine that getting applied to a whole range of things. Suppose that we make a real commitment to distributed energy generation. Buy solar panels by the buckets. They've come down in price greatly. You know, get people to commit that they want to put something up, and when you've got 10 households up, buy a lot, you know, buy a bunch of pallets worth of solar panels. You get them cheaper in bulk. Attic insulation, you might be able to do something with that. You know, the various other ones. Sustainable insulation. We used to do, I talked with somebody who was busily, during the campaign, last one, working, he was putting in some grass in his front lawn. He looked, you know, but he wanted it to look sort of nice. But he had rigged up a whole irrigation scheme with a huge cistern, and he said he'd bought the cistern when the city had a cistern policy. Cisterns are a pretty good idea. Rain barrels are great. Everybody makes noises about rain barrels, but how much water is in a rain barrel?
Plus,
55 gallons if you're lucky.
Nobody told me, I should have known better, that you have to elevate your rain barrel or you're not going to get it.
The hard part about rain barrels is not filling them. That's easy.
Gravity.
You can fill.
The concept is
I
gravity.
know, Peter. I know. It didn't take me long to figure it out. Once I
But
saw
the hitch
it.
is to get any serious head. Normal pressure from the faucet is about 30 pounds per square inch. Out of that high, I should know this off the top of my head. It's been a little while. I think 1 atmosphere, which is 14 pounds, which is about half that, is 30 feet. So you got to put your rain barrel up 30 feet to get half the pressure, 60 feet to get
Oh my goodness.
line. So you're never going to get that pressure. So you got to figure out other ways to get that water out. And 55 gallons is nice, but it's total drop in the bucket. If you want to irrigate a garden, you'll be out of your 55 gallon very quickly. So you need something bigger. You either need a bunch of rain barrels or you need a cistern, and you need some way to get the water out. And there are ways to do that. I've monkeyed around some with pumps that you can use to do that. Other people have.
Yeah, you pump it into a pressure, so it's solar pump into a pressure container.
Yeah, and now you can work a
And
pressurized
it's not
system.
gonna
Yeah,
give you pressure for an
Yeah.
hour, but
yeah, you can do things like that. But we could, again, that's something we could do bulk buying. We could do incentives on that. And one that seems like such a no-brainer is solar hot water. Folks that have been here long enough, longer than I've been, will remember that in the 60s and 70s there were a lot of solar hot water installations on just regular folks' houses, a lot of them around. You still see some of them. I suspect that about half of them are not being used. But they work great. It's one of the easiest things. Again, it has a symbolism to it. I remember reading an architect, and I wish I'd hung on to it, but he built himself a very environmental house out in Arizona somewhere or other. And he said, you know, it was just kind of neat to be in the house, knowing that your electricity was coming off of something renewable. I think he was mostly solar. That your water was reused, captured stuff. That your cooling was passive. Various of these things. He said it just felt different to be in that. And that always kind of stuck in my head. I put solar hot water on a while back, and it wasn't that hard to do. And you know, when the water comes out and it's almost hot enough to burn you, and that's yesterday's sun. You know, there's nothing burned
It's cool.
to make that. And you know, it's kind of ridiculous that we burn stuff to heat water when we're living in Florida. But you know, there's a little bit of an activation energy to do it. It was a bit of a hassle and to get it going. It's not all that expensive, so we need to lower the barriers to help more households do that. And again, track it. How many households do we have in Lake Worth that are on that? It's a noticeable chunk of your energy consumption. It's way behind AC, but it's noticeable.
In Lake Worth, we have a lot of, if sea level rises, we got our casino building, we got our golf course, but like no one is like really aware. One reason our Beach is still there is because there's a longshore current flows north to south, carries the sand. Palm Beach keeps putting sand on their beach, which comes to our beach, which is why we have some sand. But you know, we've got millions of dollars tied up in these things right at sea level.
We do, and there was discussion, at least among a few people at the time, that we were redoing the building at the casino building of, you know, it sits right across the coastal construction line. It only was allowed to happen at all because it was grandfathered in. And there were a number of people who said, well, knock the darn thing down and make it coastal hammock. Just get rid of the building there. And that would have been a sensible choice, but not a popular one. And
No money there.
no money there. So that option wasn't really very viable for people. I'm assuming that Martha last week talked to at least some folks about sea level rise and climate change, both, which are different. We're in a little bit of a difficult situation with sea level rise in that we're mostly a fair ways up. We're not like Miami Beach that already gets flooding, or even some parts of Delray Beach that gets flooded. There's a few places. There's places where we don't drain well, down on 8 near you. There's some streets that don't drain well when we get, and most of what's happening is it's that surface water is coming from further west and it's supposed to go out into the intercoastal, but that's high enough that it's backing up and it comes up storm drains. That happens in Broward County, but there are lots of Broward County that are only 4 feet above sea level. We're typically more 6, 8, 9 and up. So we feel like we got no problem. It's way down there at 8 feet below, but it seems to be coming up fast.
Especially here at this lofty height.
Yeah, exactly.
Is
We're
this
probably
the
at
highest
20.
highest spot in Lake Worth? Is this?
It's pretty
spot?
high
What's the
here.
elevation here?
35.
Yeah, it's probably
Up
something.
front, 28 and back.
Yeah. So
According to our plot.
I feel badly for the neighbors behind us because
Yeah.
when it rains, they get flooded. All our surface water just
Goes to
dumps
them.
right into onto their street.
yeah.
But it doesn't get caught by the berm.
Yeah, that condo that I had at the end of First Avenue South, by the launching ramp, that used to get floods.
Yeah, there are a few places that we're seeing it, but mostly not a lot, and I think that's given us a little bit of a feeling that we don't need to worry about it. I don't think that's very sensible. I think we ought to be, and I raised that quite a bit, as many of you know, with the last bond issue. I said, if you have a 30-year lifespan, that's long enough within change of sea level rise that, you know, it would be silly to put your head in the sand and ignore that. That's a lot of money to spend on infrastructure and not be thinking about it.
Martha was talking last week about how a growing legal path or legal industry is preparing for the insurance ramifications of climate change and sea level rise. Because to issue a 30-year mortgage, knowing that within that 30 years the house may not be habitable, is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Or they just charge you an exorbitant amount for your insurance, like they do on West Hampton Beach. Those houses keep getting replaced by the insurance companies, and every few years a hurricane comes and knocks them off their whatever their timbers.
Islands.
Yeah. And the guy on the newsman said, I don't know why they keep replacing my house, but they do.
But the interesting thing is that everybody acts like nobody knows about it, but behind the scenes, some of these same industries that are fighting it are preparing for it because they do know it's going to happen. It's just not good short-term policy, but they are preparing to some extent.
Yeah, and I've heard similar related things that there are movements within the legal part of real estate industry that, you know, if I sell you a house and I know that it's got a problem, I have some legal responsibility. But that's moving to, if I sell you a house and I know that there's, you know, some risk of sea level rise or climate change affecting it, now I may eventually have a legal problem too. So some of this stuff will help, but in the meantime, I think we as aware, concerned citizens need to keep a lot of pressure on elected officials. And in Lake Worth, I think it should be both. We should do our part on prevention, so anything we can do to reduce footprints, carbon footprints, changing your transportation, shifting more to bicycle and foot, less to car, on heating and cooling. Heating's not much of a deal for us, but cooling certainly is. So one that I had on my list that I forgot is, here's a minor one. Make your policies such that it is easier and more pleasant to keep your windows open. If I put a road with a lot of traffic right next to your window, are you going to open your window? Or if I let you build zero lot line stuff, are any of those people ever going to cool, you know, by opening their windows? No.
We know that one.
What's that?
We know that one.
Yeah.
We're like this far from the road on 7th Avenue.
Yeah.
There's a sidewalk between us, and that's it. So
And some
those
stuff
windows
there's
don't
not a
go.
lot that we can do about, but we can certainly, again, that could be a written policy, that we want people to feel like they can use alternate ways of cooling other than just pouring a bunch of electricity into it, and we will do everything possible to, you know, sound becomes an issue, you know. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to hear my neighbors, so I'm going to close the windows and turn on the AC, which is a logical choice and decision, but in energy terms, that's a very expensive choice, especially if it's in November, December, January, when there's no reason to run the AC, other than you've corked the place up now. So
You can yell at your kids when
Sound pollution.
the windows are down.
But people don't talk enough about sound pollution and light pollution.
They Dark Skies was on my list too.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of action items, which that reminds me of.
Okay.
Yeah, finish your talk up.
Well, I'm pretty much done, but and this is, you know,
Talk to us about Dark Skies.
Talk to Richard, but the big item that right now is, I mean, the big thing is that the folks that have been working for a long time on turtle orientation and trying to get lighting off the beach, they've had a certain amount of success. There's legal protection for doing that and all that, and there's sort of a sentiment. Even the Boca Resort or somewhere or other advertises that we do this, and you know, so they're on board.
It's good marketing.
And it's good marketing. That's all cool, except what people are finding is now the glow from further inland is still being seen and is a problem. So now you got to work harder on the further inland stuff, both light levels, so don't shine the stuff upward, shine it down, and color temperature, which is how yellow or how blue is the stuff. And it turns out the farther you go to the blue, the worse it is for the turtles. So keep it toward like an incandescent, the old style incandescent filament bulbs. Color temperature, here's the magic number, remember this one, 2700 Kelvin. That's the technical descriptor for that. Turns out that's the same color as the kind of yellowish sodium high pressure lights that have been around.
No, incandescent.
Well, it's also incandescent, but it's also the same color, or very close to the color.
Lower. The high pressure sodium's like 20.
They're even a little yellower.
Yeah.
So, but what people will, what the fear, and it's coming up as an issue because of a performance contract that we have that will go through and replace a lot of our streetlights with LED lights. It used to be a little bit cheaper to make the bluer LED lights, and you got a little bit more light output. It was about a 10% difference. It wasn't a big deal, and it keeps getting smaller. They keep getting better at making them, so it's kind of a non-issue at this point. But people will say, well, it's safer to have that kind of harsh blue light. You know, that the criminals don't like that, or whatever. You'll hear all sorts of nonsense. Whatever. Please, this is an action item. Put in word to the commissioners and the mayors that when they change the LED lights, please go for the 2700 Kelvin warmer color temperature. It works fine for safety issues, and you get the benefit of...
I mean, I hate the new headlights that they have that are so bright.
Yeah.
I mean, those are dangerous because they blind you.
It's a glare issue, and the same thing is true with the streetlights.
Overhead.
Yeah.
Okay. Replace them with what?
Use 2700K, 2700 capital K color temperature for the LED lights. And interestingly, we've pushed, several of us, Richard has, and some other people have pushed on the Siemens guys that are doing the performance contract for the change out of the streetlights. They've actually gone back to the manufacturers of the streetlights and said, would you do us a run of lights at that color temperature? And they said they would do us a run of them for us, because some places that don't pay attention do color ones. They do it for no extra charge.
Oh, wow.
So again, here's a symbolism place that we can say, hey, we got these, we got the manufacturer to do it for us. They were willing to do it no run. We're doing the right thing for the turtles, and we chose to do it voluntarily. make those points in your letters or emails to the commissioners and to the mayor. They need the pressure on them.
You had another action item?
Yeah, get the mayor to sign the regional climate action plan. I don't know why we're not on.
Are we the only holdout?
No, we're not the only holdout, but we should have been one of the first. And we've missed that
What's
boat.
it called,
but
the regional?
Regional Climate Action Plan. I'm sure Martha talked about it last week. That it's actually nationally known and probably somewhat internationally known. The 4 South Florida counties, particularly staff and some elected folks, started getting together probably maybe almost as much as a decade ago now, and said, look, these climate change and sea level rise issues affect all of us. We need to work on it together across county boundaries. So Martin, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties all jumped in. Is it Martin? Or is it Monroe? I don't know,
Monroe.
I forget. I think it's Monroe. Yeah, Monroe is obviously a little bit
Key West.
worried about this sort of stuff. They're a little low down there. And they've gotten a lot of attention, built up some very concrete plans to pay attention to this, bring it back to infrastructure, to choices on building, to building codes and so on. And they're looking, the counties have pretty much all signed on at the elected level, but they're looking for municipalities to sign on, and there's really no reason that we couldn't. And we should get the energy conservation program back. So those are some things that need action.
I wanted to ask you, this talk about having a ballpark at John Prince Park,
I think it's gone away.
It gone away again?
I believe so. I
They
believe that
found
West
another
Palm.
place.
Yeah,
They found
not through any enlightened policy on our part, but we got saved by the bell, more or less.
You know, as I'm listening to you and go to all of these, you know, demonstrations and conversations, I think that the majority of the population really cares, but they're not enough invested in the future. The humanity needs, there's something about needing your needs to be met now, and you're not willing to give up the creature comforts that we are accustomed to for an investment in future generations. We don't think that way as a race.
Well, I think especially in South Florida where people aren't from here, I think it's a little bit different. If you know, grow up in this small town and then your kids stayed in that town and then your grandchildren are in that town and all your friends and the people you knew were in that town, you have a much bigger investment. I mean, we found that with the census. Getting people who have made their home, their residence, Florida for tax purposes, they do the census up north where they're from. So, you know,
They have the
a
same
heart
issues.
tug.
They have different issues, but it's the same idea.
There is a mentality that I think
The
get a little more of
long-time
it.
residents don't want to stop driving their their trucks on the beach because they've been doing it. Their grandparents did it, and they want to do it. Meanwhile, they don't give a damn about piping plovers. They got the bumper stickers that the plover tastes just like chicken.
It does.
Which it does
Don't
not.
You know, it's
I think it is a very big challenge, and it's one that interests me a lot. And I think one of the pieces is that I'm convinced that human beings, we think we're a whole lot smarter than we are. And I think that we do a lot to insulate ourselves from circles of things. If I go to the thermostat and I turn it up, it's like, you know, it takes me a little energy to turn the knob back when it was a thermostat, you know, a knob, or push the button for click it up a couple degrees. There's no price to that. There's no connection to what did that just do. And I think we don't do well without the feedback. I just carried a bag of mulch on my head in Home Depot the other day, and I thought, wow, man, you can really feel that in your neck. What about those people who do this every day, that they haul their water from the stream? I'll bet they watch every drop of that water. We're used to having stuff come out of a pipe or stuff coming out of an outlet on the wall. If you don't have the direct feedbacks, it's much harder to be concerned about watering. We're better at watching our gas tanks. Not a lot better, but at least you got a needle on the thing, you can kind of see that it's going down.
Yeah.
We need to have that, and you need to have a sense that that's the reverse of a kitchen faucet or the wall outlet, that's not a tank. That's just a pipe. A tank is a storage that you know it's easy to get your head around. The tanks run out. You got to refill them periodically. Pipes, they just, you know, they're like streams. You know, they keep running. I don't care how much I use out of it.
Look at the people who have well water and say, well, I don't have a problem, I have a well. And
Yeah.
they imagine that there's this like personal cistern under their house that they draw water from that doesn't suck water from everybody.
Yeah, except you
around
have to
them.
pay the electric bill for the pump.
Yeah.
Pump
But
the water
again,
up out of the well. That was our concern back home.
also prices, and that's part of that feedback. Prices, most people who think about resource management and societal decisions will tell you that, especially in the US, our prices per unit are ridiculous. Our water is way too cheap, our electric is way too high.